Hello and welcome to the Behaviour Pod. I'm Samantha Delakia, the founder of SPD Tuition and Coaching and the creator of the Behaviour Balance System and the Behaviour Bank. And this is your one-stop shop for all things behaviour. And today I'm very excited. This is the first of our mini-series with the gorgeous Charlotte, who is our TBB expert when it comes to all things communication and speech and language. Welcome to the pod, Charlotte.
I'm so happy to be here. Thanks, Sam, for having me.
Thank you for joining me. You know that I'm a bit passionate about the topic of behaviour, and I know that we've done so much together on this that I'm itching to get stuck in with this conversation.
I know that this is something that we're both really passionate about, so I'm here, happy to spread the word about all things communication and behaviour.
Absolutely. Shall we get stuck in? We've got some questions and some myths to bust along the way. And this first of the mini-series is all about communication and how we can recognize communication before children start talking. The question was, how can my child communicate if they can't talk? Now, I know you have loads to say about this.
I absolutely do. I think this is a question that I get asked a lot, particularly from parents and professionals of slightly younger children often. So the question of, I don't think they're quite communicating with me yet, or I'll go out to baby groups and I'll be like, how's everything going with communication? And parents look at me like I'm bonkers because they're like, well, my child's tiny, they're not talking yet. But there's so much that all children do as infants. And in some children, this goes on for much longer. If they are non-speaking, they might be communicating a lot through their other means. So when we're talking about kind of behaviors, or non-verbal communication, the sorts of things that we might be seeing from kind of those really early stages of things like using your eye contact and your body positioning. So are you turning towards the person who's talking to you? You're kind of looking at them. How are you using your facial expressions to show whether you like something or don't like them? And your child might be moving their body in a particular way to tell you when they're happy or sad. So one that lots of parents and professionals will be able to kind of like resonate with is like when children are like really uncomfortable, often their bodies get really stiff, or they might arch their back slightly.
I'm going to say the back arch is a familiar experience.
Absolutely. And that's, again, I think sometimes it's useful for us to hang this on the context of what we're seeing in infants or babies, but actually this sort of stuff continues as children continue to develop. And actually, even for those children who do go on to be talkers, talking is just one tiny part of the way that they're communicating with you. Actually, they're going to
7% of what we communicate? Is that wrong?
I mean, the statistics of the jury's out, Sam. You know, like the different research things to say.
I feel like that was like one of many percentages that I have read in the many books.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that the one that I read recently was maybe 20 to 30% of communication is verbal, but basically it's in the minority. I think that's what we need to know. So basically, the majority of what we're communicating is through our nonverbal communication, also known as our behavior. So the two things are really highly linked. So yeah, your child will be doing all sorts of things to communicate with you. And then we also need to consider there that some children go on to use alternative methods of communication as well. So they might be using things like gestures, signs, showing you objects. They might have more of a robust alternative communication system, things like picture symbols, or they might have high-tech things like using iPads or devices similar to that. So there's so much communication that can be happening outside of just the talking. And I think when it comes to behavior, what we really need to think about that is kind of one, acknowledging and validating that kids are communicating with us even if they're not talking. But two, sometimes we have to help our kids make sense of that as well, right? So we have to actually be doing that kind of empathizing and reflecting back and maybe interpreting for them what we think we might be seeing because of the way that they're moving their body. You know, just as a mom, an example of this for me would be, and my kids get really hangry. I don't know if you experience this, Sam.
I do, but I get really hangry as well. In fact, my husband says I get samgry, like which is a whole level of angry because I do feel that. But you know, I was thinking as you were talking, even before we kind of got to the hangry, you know, sometimes we get or I've certainly had, parents say that they're worried about children using other things, and there's a bit of fear around that, the idea that if we do allow children to lean on pictures and symbols or signs, we've got a lot around Makaton and supporting Makaton in the Behaviour Bank. And, they get a bit concerned that actually that will prevent their children from speaking. So, kind of can we circle back around to hangry in 1 second and just kind of touch on that very briefly, because I think that this is something that so many parents and practitioners are concerned about. If we give them an alternative, will they then, quote unquote, get lazy or, not want to use words?
Yeah, this is an interesting one, isn't it? I think as a society, I guess as an ableist society, we tend to put speech and verbal communication on a pedestal, but actually communication is communication, and communication and interaction should be a two-way thing. That's part of the interactive nature of it, and it should be positive. And actually kids who have a positive experience of interaction and communication are more likely to come back for more. And the more they come back for more, the more practice they're going to get. And guess what? Practice makes progress. I know that's a saying that we're both huge fans of. So actually, we just need to make sure that we are offering a variety of ways for kids to communicate with us so that they have that positive experience. And actually, the most important thing here is that kids are enjoying interacting with other people, and that they are able to get their needs met, and they're able to tell people what their ideas are. And actually, if they can do that through using a variety of approaches, that's great. We don't need to teach kids just to be sign users or just to have access to their AAC device. They could actually use a combination of all of those things. And the way that we're going to model that is through us using those things ourselves and showing that those things are acceptable ourselves. And does it stop children talking? No, it doesn't. There's no evidence to suggest that. And actually, there's more evidence to show that those kids who have access to those alternative methods can then go on to develop their spoken language as well.
It would take that pressure off, right? It stops it from being a thing. It stops it from being that boundary between them and the world. I assume, is kind of, can we unlock another door that gets you to the same place that means that you're not feeling that high intense stress experience when it comes to language and communication, which of course means that our brain is functioning in a different way because it's not feeling all those feelings and going through that stress response every time a child is trying to communicate.
Mm-hmm. And I think something else I just want to touch on under kind of using total communication approach, and by that I mean having access to a variety of different methods of communication, is that often there's this sense of, oh well, my child or this child I'm working with can talk, so why would I give them access to this other stuff? But actually, if we listen to adults who have a lived experience of having a communication difference, or an adult who's neurodivergent, lots of them say that actually they can feel more comfortable with certain types of communication in certain environments for certain people, or it might depend a bit on things like sensory overwhelm, how the rest of that day has panned out. So it may be that, yes, they can talk, but there's certain situations where if they had access to some alternative, they would much prefer to use that. So you're really just kind of, by having access to a variety of things, you're letting the child kind of take ownership of using whatever they feel comfortable with within that situation.
And also just knowing it's there, right? Sometimes they might not use it, but the fact that they know it's there allows them that inner comfort almost, that kind of, that security, that certainty that if they need it, it's there, allows them to then not need it so much.
Mm-hmm. And I know that you have a lot of followers and people who listen to this podcast who are working with children. And I think like the key thing there in terms of exactly what you said, knowing it's there is really good, but also knowing it's there and it's welcome and that other people use it, that's something slightly different. So I would really encourage you, if you're working with a child or you have a child at your home who has some sort of alternative device, whether that's some picture cards, whatever it is that they're using, make sure that you regularly get it out and use it so that they can feel comfortable, that they know that that is acceptable, and they know that it's not just something that sits in their book bag on the side, like making it so. And it doesn't always have to be specific to that child. It doesn't have to be such a case of like, that's that child's voice, let's not let anyone else touch it. actually, if the other kids are allowed to kind of access that device and communicate with that child in that way, then it makes it much more inclusive. So just, like, get playful, think about, as a whole class, can you use a variety of communication approaches, because actually all the kids benefit from it as well, both in terms of understanding how an individual child communicates, but also a lot of these kids need it. When we're thinking about things like Makaton, I always encourage schools to, use it with every child, because it supports every child to develop their communication skills.
I love that. And, one of the things within the behaviour balance system and just our approach in general, and obviously, all the work we're doing in the bank, is about creating that neuroaffirming approach. It's about having that inclusivity. It's about making sure that we are catering for every child and every grown-up that's in our world. So if we're creating this as a culture within our classrooms or our nursery settings, our childcare settings, our homes, then every child is going to feel confident that they can use whatever they need to use in order to feel heard and seen, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Can we go back to the hangry? I'm so sorry, Charlotte. I was like,
yes,
pause on hangry just for a second, because I didn't want to miss all your gorgeous gems of wisdom around stuff.
All I was going to say was, in terms of if our child is communicating something to us non-verbally, we have a really vital role there in interpreting and reflecting that back to them. So I know that my kids are hangry before they do. And sometimes with that word, it can be a bit of a trigger for them. So, I have to be careful in the way that I approach that. But actually, if I can start to help them identify that if they are noticing X, Y, and Z, that possibly means that they might be hungry, and help with them, maybe have a chat about what they could do if they're feeling hungry to make themselves feel better. That's the start of kind of co-regulation.
I love that. I love that. And co-regulation is a whole other thing that we could talk about for days, couldn't we, Charlotte? There's one thing that I say, just to kind of add to that before we finish up for this episode. I used to say to my son, "Is there a monster in your tummy? Is it feeling hungry, hungry?" Because there's a song, and I'm not going to sing it to you, or you'll be very pleased to hear. But it's about this monster in your tummy, and the idea is that he was starting to notice, that his focus would go to his stomach and be like, oh, actually, is there something, a feeling? We talk about emotions being vibrations in the body, within the system, and I think it just draws attention to that part of the body, doesn't it? And then they can kind of check in with that part of the body and be like, oh, can I feel something there? I don't know. But again, once used a few times, it became a bit of a triggering song. I don't want to hear that, mummy. So it lasted for as long as it lasted, and every now and again I bring it back, and he doesn't mind. But sometimes they get a little bit overwhelmed with one approach, don't they?
I find it often helps to revisit and explore those things outside of the situation. So sort of like dealing with it in the moment, and then talking about it at a time when they're more regulated. So thinking about, earlier when we were doing X and you were saying this, what do you think might have been going on? And then we kind of problem solve it when we're in a point of calm.
Always. Oh, I love it. Wow, this brings episode 1 to a close. Woohoo! I'm very excited to jump into the next one. But before we finish up, I just want to thank everyone for watching, if you're watching, and listening, if you're listening, because they can find us in one place, can't they? Together. Where can they head over to find you as one of our many experts, our wonderful experts in there?
You can head over to the Behaviour Bank.
So please come and join us in the Behaviour Bank, because there are so many wonderful gems from the gorgeous Charlotte that she is sharing with us on a regular basis, that you will have access to. And it is the only bank in the world where you invest in support, it saves you time, and the children profit in the future. So head over. I had to read that bit there because I was like, oh, don't miss that bit. But head over, check it out, get in touch, because we want to hear from you and support you as you move forwards. So we hope you enjoyed this first episode, and we'll see you in episode number 2, guys. Bye.